Everyone to the first working group on open science policies and policy instruments. It's great to have you with us. So this meeting again is in the context of the implementation of the UNESCO recommendation on open science. My name is Ezra Clark. I'm the Chief of Section of Science, Technology, Innovation Policy in the Natural Sciences sector in UNESCO. And before starting, I just mention a couple of housekeeping points. So firstly, please, if you could mute your microphones and keep your cameras on. Sorry, keep your cameras off unless you're speaking. You can please share questions and inputs in the chat box at the bottom of your screen. And when we come to the question and answer time, please ask for the floor by raising your hand. Just to inform you, you probably would have seen as you came in, the meeting's being recorded and the meeting will be held in English only. So it's very encouraging already. We have 63 participants I can see at the moment, and that seems to be going up as we go. So as you see from the agenda, we'll start with some brief background, and I apologize to those who participated in the first working group or have heard this before, but I think it's useful to have a kind of overview and background to have everyone at the same level of understanding or updated before we start. So after that brief introduction I'll make, we'll then have a series of interventions and discussions on national and institutional open science policies, which will look at the kind of overview, opportunities and challenges. Then we'll move on really more to the explanation of the objectives of the working group. We have a special announcement for a call on open science papers. And without any further ado on that, let me move to give a quick update of where we are. So thank you. I can see the slide on the screen. So as most of you probably know by now, last year in November, at the 41st session of the General Conference of UNESCO, 193 member states unanimously adopted the UNESCO recommendation on open science. This was developed, as you know, some of you were involved in it, in a regionally balanced, multi-stakeholder, inclusive and transparent consultation process. And the final adoption of this recommendation really was a historic moment. So it's a landmark agreement which defines shared values and principles for open science. It identifies measures to make open science more accessible, to make the scientific process more inclusive, and the outputs of science more readily available and relevant for society. And the assistance, support and promotion by numerous actors from around the world in developing and leading the successful adoption of this recommendation is greatly acknowledged and appreciated. And many thanks to many of you who are with us today who are involved in that process. So if you haven't seen the recommendation before or don't have a copy, we'll at the end indicate how you can get hold of this. But let me first just identify or indicate a couple of the real highlights of this recommendation. So number one, it's the first internationally normative instrument on open science. It contains the first internationally agreed definition of open science. It also spells out the consensus core values and guiding principles. It addresses a large range of multiple actors and stakeholders of open science. And it recommends actions on various levels to operationalize the principles of open science while proposing innovative approaches to open science at different stages in the scientific cycle. And it calls for the development of a comprehensive open science monitoring framework. So if we can jump to the next slide, please. So if we look at the key areas of action described by the recommendation, the recommendation encourages member states to prioritize seven areas in their implementation of this recommendation. The first of which is promoting a common understanding of open science and its associated benefits and challenges, as well as the diverse paths which can take us to open science. Developing an enabling policy environment, an enabling policy environment for open science. Investing in infrastructure and services which contribute to open science, investing in training, education, digital literacy and capacity building to enable researchers and other stakeholders to participate fully in open science, to foster a culture of open science and aligning incentives for open science, promoting innovative approaches at different levels in the process, and promoting international and multi-stakeholder cooperation in the context of open science with this view or this aim of reducing the digital, technological and knowledge gaps. And it's also, of course, important when looking at the areas of action and implementation and the opportunities available to us also to recognise and identify some of the major challenges faced. So one of the major challenges, of course, is the change in conventional and traditional scientific culture. So this is something, you know, which is really a kind of fundamental change. The human and institutional capacities always a limitation. The adequate infrastructures, and this can be, you know, complex or even to the stage of just having reliable internet conductivity. The evolution in the incentives for and revision of the current criteria for evaluation of scientific excellence and careers, and also how to address the unintended negative consequences of the open science practices. And on this slide at the bottom in this arrow, you can see the kind of approaches or initiatives that could be applied in addressing these challenges. And this is really how we've structured the various working groups of which we're discussing, and more on that in a second. Next slide, please. So in terms of implementation of the recommendation at the international level, and we're looking now, of course, after the adoption of the recommendation and the role of UNESCO in working with all the partners and stakeholders. So these include developing a series of supporting tools, so technical briefs, policy briefs, fact sheets and guidelines, collecting and mapping open science policies and strategies, collecting and sharing best practices between and among countries, and analysing open science financing mechanisms and incentives, promoting infrastructures for open science, capacity building, and developing an open science monitoring framework. And this work is carried out in the three main arenas working with partners and stakeholders, and one of which is the Global Open Science Partnership. We have creating a steering committee for open science, and of course the open science working groups, which we're a part of now. So there are 5 working groups. The Open Science Working Group on Capacity Building met last week, and this is the second meeting on policies and strategies, as you all know. And the 2 main elements or deliverables we'll be looking at is a global repository of policy instruments and an open science policy guide. I won't speak any more on that now because we'll come back to this after the discussion on the national and institution open science policies. So now we will please introduce our series of speakers. Please, we're requesting, I believe, 5 minutes each. Let me just double check. I think we've said 5 minutes per speaker. Okay, so let me then please introduce our first speaker, or first intervention today. So this is open science policies in Africa. And LIBSENT, so it's a rather long acronym, the Library Support for Embedded National Research and Education Network Services and E-Infrastructure. So can I please invite Omar Ayaya to present? You have the floor.
Well, thank you very much. It's nobody calls it anything else but LIBSENT these days. So I will just share my slides. So can I confirm you can see my slides then?
Yes, yep. We can see. Thank you.
Perfect. Great. So my name is Omar Oaya. I work with WACREN. WACREN is the Western Central African Research Network. and it coordinates LibSense. LibSense is an initiative of the 3 regional African research networks. So it was, there's not very much to say about existing policies in Africa, but we have Ethiopia leading the way with a policy that was adopted by the Ministry of Science and Higher Education in 2019. It's an open access policy with a whole lot of open science elements. So what it did at the time, it's mandated open access to publications and data from all publicly funded research institutions in Ethiopia. There's over 47 of them. It has elements that encourages open science best practices, data management plans, fair data, and it's to support the policy. There's a national academic repository for data and publications that actually can be used in itself, but it also syndicates information and research outputs from institutional repositories that the universities have. Aside from Ethiopia, there's an ongoing discussion in South Africa. And the first draft of the open science policy was discussed in February. There had been a series of conversations in South Africa about open science, and South Africa is an element of its own in Africa. But that draft is passing through the process. My understanding is that process will take up to 12 to 18 months. But in a similar way, it mandates open access for publicly funded research outputs. It talks about a national forum to promote best practices in open science, and different incentives for researchers to publish in open access. But that conversation is ongoing. Beyond these two, there's a number of activities going on in different countries. Now, this is largely happening in the LibSense community of practice. What LibSense is a community of research networks and librarians and information practitioners who basically working to strengthen open science in the different countries and sort of localize and contextualize open science as much as they can. Now, within the main activity that speaks to national and institutional policies is an activity called the National Open Science Roadmaps. And what essentially happens is that the different local actors and stakeholders in countries come together essentially to establish a path and develop policies in a co-creatively, as we seem to we're about to do in this group. And that's across different countries. I've listed them there that are currently working at this. It's Cote d'Ivoire, Ethiopia, Ghana, Lesotho, Mozambique, Nigeria, Somalia, Tanzania, and Uganda. But I thought I would list 3 that have some significant output or have actually managed to get a national symposium or forum going. So in Cote d'Ivoire, this happened last month. So what the outcome of that is working groups on policy infrastructure and advocacy and capacity building. So the idea here is they brought in the ministries and the different stakeholders, and they want to use these 3 working groups to work towards an open science plan. Now, for the policy working group, one of the institutions, the virtual university, has already sort of ratified an open science policy. That policy was also based on a LibSense template that's been developed. And that policy is going to be used as a basis for that policy working group moving on. Similar activity happened in Nigeria late last year. And there, the Tertiary Education Fund, which has a research and development standing committee that's working to submit a bill to the National Assembly, has been the outputs from that meeting has been to connect with this committee to include open science elements, but that's still in the very early stages. But in both these countries, one important, I just thought I would mention that, the Africa Connect Free project, which Wakran is part of, that is, for those that do not know, Africa Connect Free is a European project with African partners interconnecting research networks across Africa. So at the moment, we've been working for 10 years. We've managed to connect 22 out of the 38 research networks, so that's 22 countries. And the focus in Africa Connect 3 has changed as time has passed, and open science has become more of an agenda. So one of the projects there is helping countries to establish shared research repository infrastructure. So at the moment, we're working in Cote d'Ivoire, Nigeria, and Burkina Faso. And this is based on Invenio. Invenio is a repository platform from CERN. And the collaboration is with the National Institute of Informatics in Japan, who are also a big user of Invenio platform and have a model for supporting shared research, shared repositories that's been sort of taken on board. Uganda is another country where there's significant activity towards national open science infrastructure and policies. And they also had a similar symposium last year. Now, what they have slightly more outputs than the others. So they've drafted and discussed an open science plan. They provided a roadmap with some recommendations for best practices, managed to develop some data management plan templates. They also have deployed a national repository for publications and data, and having a working group that's been set up across the country to drive that. I thought it was also important to just sort of, they have signed an MOU with the National Council of Science and Technology, and the idea there is to take all this activity that's going on and sort of strengthen it. This year, they have started hosting open science advocacy meetings and are conducting an open science readiness assessment for the country. This is another LIPSENSE activity that is connected. These are like regional policy workshops. And in this case, what happens is that the research networks, WACREN, Ubuntu Alliance, and ASREN, are collaborating with university associations in the 3 regions to discuss how to implement UNESCO recommendations at the campus level. So the idea here is to take the national efforts with the National Open Science roadmaps and use that to, sort of bring all of what's happening in different countries within the regions to discuss synergies, especially open science leadership on campus, because these are like vice chancellors and deputy vice chancellors of the universities. Right now, the focus is research assessment reform. So some of the culture change that's required for open science to work. Alongside the Cote d'Ivoire National Open Science meeting in April, there was also a meeting. This was all co-located with the WACREN 2022 conference, which is also focused on open science. And that meeting had leaders from about 11 countries, including Ghana, which was we hosted. So 12 countries in the region. As part of that workshop, a compendium of open science policy case studies from different institutions across Africa, which had been developed in the first regional policy meeting, which was held in the Ubuntu Alliance region, was expanded with more institutions and a checklist for universities implementing UNESCO recommendations. I put the link there, I'll put it in the chat. But I've also put in 2 links, the links to the LIPSENSE website for those who are not very familiar with LIPSENSE, and the Africa Connect 3 project. So hopefully I have stayed within my 5 minutes, and that's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that first presentation. Very interesting and great to see already the activities and work on the in the direction of the UNESCO recommendation and on the implementation. So that's excellent. I think we will go through the presentations. We'll come back to questions at the end. So as I said, please, if you have questions or comments, please put them in the chat box and we can come back to those after that. So thank you very much, Mr. Ayaya. Thank you, much appreciated. Thank you very much. So we'll now move on to our next presentation, which is regarding open air. And I'll just warn, I'm going to change the order slightly of the presentation. So after that, we'll have the presentation from CERN, and then we'll move on to Clasco after that. So please, if I can ask open air. So Natalia Manola, please. So this is open air is a socio-technical infrastructure for scholarly communication and open science, and we shall hear all about this. So Ms. Manola, you have the floor. Thank you.
Just a moment so I can thank you. Just a moment so I can share my screen. There it is. Can you see it?
Yes, we can see it. Yeah, full screen and very clear. Thank you.
Okay, so what I will present, I will go very briefly over the high level of what are the key European policy initiatives for open science, and this is how they are aligned with UNESCO's initiative. So, for example, we started off with Horizon Europe, where all research is open, or trying to be as open as possible. Then we have an infrastructure development with the European Open Science Cloud, which is building infrastructure for open and fair research. So it's about open science. And then, apologies for that. And then we have the National Open Science Initiatives or National Open Science Cloud Initiatives, who are aligned with the European Open Science Cloud. Lately, in the last year, we have the renewed European Research Era agenda with 20 policy actions, and I've just highlighted some of them that are related to open science. So, enable open science, including through the EOS, reform the research assessment, bring science closer to citizens, and establish an error monitoring system, which is also will be watching for open science. And last but not least, in the last year or so, from DG RTD, from the European Commission, we have this Reforming Research Assessment Coalition, which is including open science. All of this, if you talk to Europe, it's a very diversity like any other continent. It's within the European data strategy. So all of the data should be in the sovereignty of Europe, and we should try to have it as open as possible so we can share. And research is one of these initiatives. What is the policy landscape? It's diverse, but what we would like to see, what we observe is that it's converging. So we have strategies, policies, and implementations. We have different views depending on, because the European Open Science Cloud has been a real push. So open science could be about sharing publications or data, or it can be about access to computing and storage, and there's other services. And we see different maturity levels. We have national strategies for open science in place in many countries. And in many others, this is a work in progress. These strategies, they may come from a via top-down process where ministries or funders are pushing for this, or such as examples as France or Norway, or we can have bottom-up processes where the community is initiating this process, and then the ministries and funders follow. Also, what is important is the role of national open science coordinators, which is either an organization or a person who oversees the implementation. Just got some number from the Open World Database, which may not be reflecting the truth, but at the institutional level, Europe is doing well with 700 registered policies, which we can have, one of the key remarks here is that they could be often soft mandates and not followed up with infrastructure. So apart from this diverse landscape is that there are many efforts in Europe about supporting tools and instruments. So what different type of guides, templates, observatories, mutual learning environments. And this is something that the UNESCO efforts are pushing to the surface, which is really great. So let me start with the mutual learning environments and what we have been doing for OpenAIRE in the past 10 years. We have the National Open Access Desks, which is a bottom-up network. We have been building the country pages where we're documenting what is happening in every country. And now we have an internal working group on open science policy monitoring. From the EC, we had an EC originating body, the National Points of Reference, which are the public authorities just monitoring the policies and the infrastructure. Now we have a bottom-up network, the Council of National Open Science Coordinators, CONOSC, which is, again, bringing different stakeholders together. And last but not least, we have the Coalition for Research Assessment, which is by Science Europe and University Alliance, European University Alliance. Another instrument, what we have found to be very, very useful is model policies and toolkits, because as part of the learning, mutual learning environment, what we see in order to align, we need to learn from each other. So what we have done in the past years, which we need to update now, is we have created some model policies, checklists, and fact sheets for research performing organizations or for funders, which have been really useful and instrumental in allowing the stakeholders in different countries in Europe to bring to align and be relatively the same on how we are approaching open science. Also, another instrument is the observatory. So in OpenAIRE, we're building, based on the OpenAIRE Research Graph, we're building the Open Science Observatory, which is a tool for policymakers and research managers to see how they are faring in open science. So we have a bunch of indicators extracted from the research graph, and then we can see for a country page, what are the key aspects that they as part of the indicators. For example, number of open access publications, data sets, repositories, journals. Then we're discussing about more elaborate indicators about green and gold. And this is a place where it can be very, very useful to see in practice, not to see what the policy is, but how the policy actually is applied and what is the uptake of the policy. And last but not least, within the EOSC and the EOSC Future Project, we are working on the EOSC Observatory, which is envisioned to be a policy intelligent tool where we monitor at the European level policies, investments, resources, and infrastructure. So this is a kind of coordinated survey tool, and then visualizations and everything, where the member states, but also the EOSC Association, which has institutional members, will be able to report on a yearly or on a every 6 months. This remains to be seen because this is work in progress. The various aspects of the policy. There, we're looking at 3 levels of indicators for monitoring policies, practices, which is infrastructure and uptake, and then later on the impact. So this is work in progress, but we really think it fits within the whole global UNESCO efforts. And thank you.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Thank you for that excellent presentation. In a very short time, you covered a huge amount of ground, and there's clearly lots going on and many different activities, tools, and so on. So it would be very interesting, for us. I mean, lots to learn and to chew on and to continue to discuss in this working group. So that's excellent. Very, very much appreciated.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Manola. Thank you. Okay, so we'll press on. We'll move on to our next intervention presentation, please. And as mentioned, for time reasons, we are going to now move to the science policy, open science policy at CERN. So hopefully, Kamran Naim, you're ready? Yes, you are. Excellent. Thank you very much. You have the floor. I can see the slides clearly. Everything looks good, and I can hear you. Thank you. Please go ahead.
Excellent. Thank you, Ezra. Thank you to colleagues at UNESCO, and also thank you to the fellow panelists on this working group today. It's an honor to be included among you and to hear of your excellent work. So I'm here to talk to you today about the work that CERN is doing, in particular relating to the development of an open science policy. Hopefully many of you will know CERN. We're the European Organization for Nuclear Research, founded in 1954. And I'm not going to read through the whole mission, but just to say that our organizational mission has a specific focus that our science should have, should accrue benefits for all. And as such, we believe that the practice of open science is one of the most effective ways for us to kind of achieve our organizational mission. And so I'll talk to you about how we're working towards that. Open science was actually enshrined in a somewhat visionary way in our founding convention, which was written in 1953, which said that the results of our experimental and theoretical work should be published or otherwise made generally available. And so we see this as a very early mandate for the practice of open science. Excuse me. It's important to mention, though, that we pursue open science not as an obligation, but as an expression of a collective moral and financial responsibility to the member states of CERN. So CERN is a global partnership of 23 member states, home to the world's largest scientific instrument, the Large Hadron Collider. And we host over 12,000 scientists and engineers from around the world. So the practice of open science means that given the complexity of our science, the practice of open science needs to be an ongoing and actually ever-evolving effort. We host dynamic research teams from all around the world. They collectively publish about 1,000 research articles a year. The scientists are engaged in multiple experimental collaborations that largely operate independently of one another and use different tools and different practices. The research conducted at CERN is one of the most data-intensive branches of science. And so this means that, again, the practice of open science, open access, open data, all of the various pillars of open science, which I'll talk about in a minute, have to be done through kind of a coordinated and comprehensive approach, which we have tried to pull together with our latest policy effort. Now, we've had an open access policy, which has required that all of our research articles be published open access since 2014. In 2020, the LHC experiments agreed on an open data policy. Obviously, both these policies are readily available on the web. And in 2020, there was also the European Strategy for Particle Physics that was published, which is kind of the guiding document, guiding strategy document for the field. And this document stated that the particle physics community should work with the relevant authorities to help shape the emerging consensus on open science, and as such, should implement an open science policy for the field. We at CERN saw that it incumbent upon us, given our experience in the practice of open science, that we should kind of take on this role in helping to develop an open science policy for the field, but that meant that we had to start with the development of our own. And of course, open science policy development is being driven by various funder open science policies as well, which our experiments will have to abide by, and we're working to establish a support office at CERN to help them. So we see the practice of open science at CERN as being this kind of holistic activity, which covers all of the major pillars of open science. I'm going to talk to you about the development of the policy itself, which began through a working group established in the summer of 2021, given this kind of mandate from the European Strategy for Particle Physics. And this working group was developed with two objectives. One was to create a framework for the regular and proactive exchange of knowledge between active stakeholders in open science at CERN, and also to then work on the development of this open science policy. Now at CERN, I think it's true to say that open science is practiced throughout the organization in different departments within the experiments. And this has happened historically for a very long time. And given the size of CERN and the complexity of what we do, often many of our teams didn't know what others, maybe a few blocks away on the CERN campus were doing. And so this was really an opportunity for us to kind of identify and pull together all of the major stakeholders into one working group. So that process itself took a little bit of time, but finally we were able to develop a working group with 22 representatives from across different departments at CERN, and also the various experiments that we host at the lab. We did a survey of existing policies and policy toolkits, and as Natalia presented earlier, we specifically actually utilized the open air model policy on open science for research performing organizations as the starting point for the development of our policy. So I don't think it will surprise anyone when you look at the policy once it's finally published, it does follow the kind of guideline and structure that was presented by Open Air. The working group then worked collectively to draft to draft and customize the policy to CERN. It has finally been approved as of April internally by the working group and has been escalated now to CERN management for review and endorsement by our council. Hopefully, we hope to have this document published in June. But just to give you a little preview, it's in approval right now. The document is organized with a number of different sections, starting off with a preamble, which states the kind of alignment of the values of open science with our organizational mission. We cite the UNESCO definition, and thanks to our colleagues in UNESCO for the incredible way they were able to reach consensus on a definition. And then also kind of describes the commitments that CERN as a lab will be making. Obviously, we already had an open access policy and open data policy in place. So the policy itself at the high level in the first line states our policy position and then points to our open access and open data policies. And then what you're seeing for the rest are just our approach was the very first sentence should state our policy position. So on open source software, our software is available as open source where possible, applying a license approved by the Open Source Initiative. You can see the first lines for hardware. We have a section on research integrity, reuse, and reproducibility, which we believe is critical, particularly to the holistic and consistent practice of open science. And then on infrastructure, we ensure that our infrastructures meet trusted quality standards, comply with FAIR principles, have long-term preservation plans, and are interoperable with international standards and initiatives such as EOSC at the European level. We make statements about research assessment and evaluation. We're currently participating in the Paris Call efforts on research assessment. We mentioned education, training, and outreach, and then also citizen science. So in the interest of time, I'll just talk about the next steps. Our policy, we hope to get approved in June. It will be accompanied by an implementation document, which will be continually worked upon by the members of our working group, which will outline roles, responsibilities, specific mechanisms for the delivery of open science activities under each of the major spheres or pillars of activity, and the resources that will be required in order to effectively execute. We will be working later on this year with my colleague Sonia Delmeyer-Tyson, who's on the call, on the development of a reporting, monitoring, and evaluation framework. And in that context, we also hope to engage with our UNESCO colleagues in this work. Our working group is now turning into the CERN Open Science Forum, which will meet regularly, hopefully 2 to 3 times a year. And we hope to revisit and update our policy as necessary at least every 2 years. And so that's where we are. And I thank you for your time. I hope I didn't take too much time. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Naim. That was very interesting to hear this from the CERN perspective, from your kind of long history with this kind of open science, let's say, approach from the very beginning, and how you've got to where you are now. So that's really interesting, and I think many lessons to be learned. So we certainly look forward to continuing to speak and communicate with you on that. Of course, we look forward to seeing your policy when it comes out later in the year, and the implementation that goes along with that. So that was really good, and I think, you know, many of the things we'll be facing, you may be able to shed some light on some of the issues and challenges that may be ahead of us. So that was really useful, and we certainly look forward to continue to work with you. So thanks so much. Thanks.
Pleasure. Thank you.
Presentation. Thank you. Okay. And now I will kind of return to the order and the agenda. Apologies for that slight change. But now, please, can I invite Laura Rovelli from CLASCO, the Open Science Policies in Latin America.
Thank you very much for this invitation. I am pleased to meet you all, and it's a pleasure to join this working group on open science. I am the coordinator of the Latin American Forum for Research Assessment, CLACSO, in Latin America. I will make a presentation orally because I have some difficulties with my computer, but then I will send my presentation to the working group. As a general overview on open science policies, Latin America and the Caribbean is one of the most advanced regions in the adoption of open access in academic and scientific journals. Open science is a movement of the last 30 years, firstly linked to open access promotion, infrastructures and regulation, but then expanded to other practices like citizen science, open scholarly communications, among others. Early in 2018, the region agreed in the Panama Declaration on Open Science to move towards collaborative models of knowledge creation, management, communication, and preservation, recognizing that open science required going beyond open access by repositioning society's leadership role to produce and benefit from science, technology, and innovation. In terms of open access, in Latin America and the Caribbean, the institutional repositories of universities and science and technology organizations are the privileged instrument for sustaining and expanding open access policies. Universities, publishers, and portals of journals and university repositories, and in a comprehensive manner, the centrality of academic editorial management favors a set of actions linked to open access. Another instrument is the development of the Latin American and Caribbean portals of scientific journals. Among them, the following stands out: Latindex, Redalyc, Cielo, Dialnet, eRevistas, Amelica, CLACSO, and among others. This scenario shows the important opportunities that exist in the region to promote open science practices. In the last decade, some pioneer countries in the region have adopted legislation to regulate open access policies for publication and open scientific data. That is the case of Peru, Argentina, and Mexico. However, recent studies show that there is a low intensity in the implementation of this legislation as a consequence of low economic incentives, low coordination and regulation in the face of fragmentation and heterogeneity of the institutions in each country. At present, with the boost of the UNESCO recommendations on open science, there are current implementation processes and compliances with the law in each country. In some cases, there are national committees for the open science recommendation implementation that are being held nowadays. By 2021, we made a study that surveyed different actions from regional national organizations of science, technology, and innovation regarding open science. Open access to publications, open research data, others linked to open research processes, and those associated with citizen science and scholarly and science communication were the most important ones. As it was mentioned before, in the last years, policy instruments are on the rise, particularly in those countries that were pioneers in regulating open access and open data. Some other initiatives through focus instruments at a state level or at national studies that are being conducted in countries that have less regulations are being developed regarding open science. Concerned with the challenges, well, the main ones had to do with the reward of open science in research assessment and the alignment of incentives for open science in research assessment. FOLEC and CLACSO are working very much on this point, trying to transform and making reforms in research assessment practices to value open science and the diversity of scientific production in research assessment of teaching staff, projects, universities, and research organizations. Also, there is a need to favor interoperable and federative open science infrastructures to nourish research assessment systems with the diverse knowledge production that exists in the region and with different initiatives on open science that are being conducted in the region. In that sense, La Referencia, the largest network of science repositories in Latin America, together with the Red Clara, had a key role in that matter. Regarding the next steps, CLACSO and FOLEC, together with other partnerships, are collecting and mapping existing open science policies and strategies in Latin America, trying to think with different actors the design and enforcement of policies in situated context, taking into account the trajectory of ecosystems in Latin America and the Caribbean, and in dialogue with those that are involved with these practices. Finally, we think that there's a need to link financial support to the openness of publications and research data and to the necessary infrastructure and training of skilled human resources to advance in open science processes. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Ms. Revelli. That is very interesting. And in a few short minutes, you've given us a very broad view of all the activities in Latin America, which is no easy task. So that's very much appreciated, and good to see, in some areas really quite advanced, as you said, some very kind of proactive and advanced approaches to open science in your region. So excellent. So with this overview, again, much to share, much to talk about. So we very much look forward to continued cooperation and discussion within the working groups, really to learn all we can from the Latin America region. So excellent. Thanks very much. Again, excellent presentation. Thank you so much. Okay, now we change regions. Now we'll be looking at open science policies in the Arab region. And if I can please ask Batul Al-Mazouk to please take the floor and tell us about the open science community of Saudi Arabia. Ms. Al-Mazouk, you have the floor. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Isra. I'm going to try and share screen to see if that works.
Yeah, we can see the screen. And now it's full screen. Perfect. Thank you. Please go ahead.
Okay, I'm just going to switch off the video to save some bandwidth. So thank you so much. It's an honor to be talking to you today and included in this conversation. Thank you so much for the invitation. I'm going to speak mainly about Saudi Arabia. I'm going to speak about our community, which is the Open Science Community Saudi Arabia, which is a grassroots organization. We don't represent any official or governmental boss here. I only represent the community itself. Just a little bit introduction about myself. So I am Batul Marzouk. I am a computational biologist affiliated with KMARC, which is a research institution here in Saudi Arabia. I'm also affiliated with the University of Liverpool in the UK. So the Open Science Community Saudi Arabia, the motivation behind building this community is there is really limited community of practices within the region. There is limited resources, there's limited awareness tools, and very, very minimal infrastructure to adopt and learn or understand anything about open science. So that's the reason we founded the community as a part of a global network called the International Network of Open Science Community, which you might be familiar with. It started in the Netherlands. There is in Sweden, Lisbon, also in Serbia. Ours is the only one within the Middle East or Arabic-speaking country. And our approach is basically to benefit from the experience outside the Arabic region and see if we can contextualize it in Saudi Arabia, and then hopefully to other communities within the Arabic region. And our vision, which is a common vision, is to provide a place in Saudi Arabia where really individuals who have no exposure about open science can interact and with experience peer can inspire each other to adopt these practices in their workflow, and also to provide feedback on what can be in the future infrastructure and support services within the region. When we go outside within the Arab countries, like outside Saudi Arabia and within the Gulf also, to speak about open science with local communities, with librarians, with scientists who are trying to implement any pillar of these practices, we find many, many blockers, some of it really unique to the region. And I'm so conscious of the time here, so I'm not going to go much into detail. I'll be focusing much in Saudi Arabia, but I want to reiterate that contextualization is really, really important here. So contextualization can only be done after also several iterations. As you might already know, really, open science is important to the region because it's going to make science more efficient, reliable, responsive to societal change. This is very urgently needed in Arabic-speaking country with really a growth in local infrastructure is affected by some sort of instability in part of the region and also economic recession. So any changes to adopt any aspect of one of these pillars is really important. And we've seen some signs. So we don't have some sort of mature policy like what you see in Europe and other countries, but there's some signs, and any signs that we see, at least in Saudi Arabia, is derived, and main reason is what we call it Saudi Arabia Vision 2030. So Saudi Arabia Vision 2030, if you're not familiar with it, is a package of economic and social policies that are designed to free the kingdom from dependence on oil. So it's a way to pursue a knowledge-based economy. And in this vision, it's really focused on installing values and enhancing knowledge and improve the equal access in education. And that's really, really important. And does align with open science. As I said, we don't have a mature policies, but we have, for example, just back last year in August 2021, the cabinet in Saudi Arabia approved new rules for regulating free and open source government software. And this is really, it does consider as a huge step in trying to implement any sort of open science and implement it within policy inside the government itself. The Saudi cabinet also extended that support to the open source government strategy to adopt it across all governmental agencies. And they also created a digital platform for depositing these governmental software. There is still room for improvement with all of this, but it's a really a huge step and to implement something related to open science within the policy. They have also open data, it's called open data, government data, to assess that bridge bridging the gap between government and citizen, allowing the public to benefit from open data. As you might already know, what we need is we need something fair, like applying the fair principles on these open data. So there's still, as I said, there's still room for improvement, but it's still a huge step toward implementing and raising awareness in terms of open science. Saudi Arabia, again, Vision 23, make it really clear that advanced digital infrastructure is very vital to success, to the innovation, to the research within Saudi Arabia itself. So they introduced, they really cared about data literacy within the community, about coding, about introducing very, very important skills and supporting new initiatives within the kingdom, like our community, Saudi Arabia, which focus on best practices in research, trying to raise awareness about best practice when it comes to research. So going back to our community work with various communities outside, like is to grow, actually, the Open Science Community Saudi Arabia, to grow from the Open Life Sciences Program, which is a mentorship program to support open science ambassadors. So we work closely with them. We work also with the Turing Way. We work with Unladies, which is a global organization that promotes gender diversity within our community. We work with the Code for Science Society, where we try to map the open science landscape within Arabic country. We work also with Outreachy to support open source and get people more involved in science within open source, not just from Saudi Arabia, but also from other countries within the region itself. Just one last thought. I just want to reiterate that the research system here within the Arabic-speaking country is very, very new, which make it hopefully easier to incorporate these principles rather than shifting and shaping established system, as you might see like in the Western world, or more mature system outside. So we're very, very optimistic in terms of implementing open science in the future. And that's pretty much from me. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much indeed. Okay. Yeah. Thanks so much. That was very interesting. Very good to see the perspective from Arab region, particularly from Saudi, and kind of optimistic and encouraging words there that you concluded with. So I say thank you very much, Ms. Alma Zouk. Very interesting. Thank you. And she'll now move on to the last of these interventions. And this one, please, is from Open Science Policy at EMBL, the European Molecular Biology Laboratory. And can I please ask Victoria Yan to present? You have the floor, Ms. Yan. Thank you.
Thank you so much for inviting me to speak at this panel, and also to be able to listen to all the other panelists in sharing their best practices from their region, and also the developments of the policies, as well as various resources. It's very important for us also at EMBL to learn and keep up to date with these developments. So my name is Victoria Yan, and I'm the Open Science Research Information Officer at the European Molecular Biology Laboratory. So a brief introduction to the EMBL is that we are an intergovernmental research institute in life sciences. So we have 27 member states. We have 6 sites in 5 countries in Europe, and we are a total of 1,800 researchers. And since we're a large community, we have very diverse representation backgrounds. And for many of us, we have very strong open science values, especially from our leadership. And one of the quotes I would like to share here is that open science has always been a part of the fabric of EMBL, and that's coming from our Director General, Dr. Edith Hurd. So the mission of EMBL's open science is to maximize the openness of the outputs of EMBL's research, services, and technology development. We would also like to support open researcher by the scientific community at large. So all of this, we hope, will eventually make the assessment and reporting of science outcomes more accurate and transparent. And one of the spirit of the open science policy is something that our director, Joe McIntyre, would always share at the introduction of the open science talk, is that the scientific publication is not the scholarship itself. It's merely advertising of the scholarship. And the major and the actual scholarship is a complete set of reagents, data, analysis, and code that are important for generating the figures and tables. So this underlies the spirit of our open science policy, which has a larger scope beyond the publication. So our open science policy has been implemented January of 2022. And in a nutshell, this includes all EMBL publications, meaning that they have to be in open access and deposited in our institutional repository, which is EuroPMC. All EMBL publications are also required to be made primarily first as a preprint. And all of the data that is affiliated with EMBL research publications is made to be findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. So all projects at EMBL are also required to have a data management plan. In addition to that, data is not useful unless it's accompanied by useful and open source software. So EMBL research software is required to be open source as well. And there's also inclusion about research assessment in alignment with DORA, of which EMBL is a signatory. And the other attribute of the EMBL open science policy is attribution and credit, and using researcher IDs such as ORCID. So speaking a little bit more about the development of the policy, which has now been implemented, the development of EMBL's open science policy has started in 2020. It was initiated by high-level support from the leadership, as well as many EMBL researchers. A working group was formed, and they worked together to revise and update existing policies that were present regarding open access, publications, and also best scientific practices. So these were made to be updated in our new EMBL open science policy to include additional scope like open source software and fair data. So what started it was also an all-staff questionnaire to understand the existing current practices in open science and challenges. And the working group also reviewed approaches from aligned organization and other policies. So the process in the end was inclusive and consultative, meaning that this was presented and iterative and included the opinions and the revisions from many EMBL stakeholders. So what was important in the development of the policy is that there was a separation between the policy and the implementation guideline. So in the implementation guidelines, it is important to identify the resources and the incentives that are needed to support the best open science practices with the researchers. And after the process, we had it approved by EMBL's governance, and it was published in December 2021. And this implementation had begun this year in January. So one of the resources that was identified that was needed to actually support implementation was additional support, so from an Office of Scientific Information Management. So for us, we are inclusive of open science support, the library, as well as the archive and records management. So we work together to support EMBL researchers to follow the best open science practices. And we develop new open science workflows and revise existing open access mechanisms that allow us to track and monitor open science progress. And this is important for us to continually monitor our progress and areas of improvement. And in addition to that, it's important for us to develop more streamlined ways to track EMBL's research output using better research information infrastructures that are ideally open databases and open linking. So a lot of this work is done together with EuroPMC. And most importantly, for all of us to support the researchers in adopting this is massive amounts of outreach and training. So we have developed training modules for open science, and we make sure to reach out to all of the units at EMBL. And also what is important is to introduce the policies to newcomers. So with all of this, we hope that we can begin to show progress in our open science policy adoption this year and in the future. And we look forward to also sharing some of the resources and tools that we develop, and also to learn from other research institutions and regions in how they best support open science implementation. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ms. Jan. That was very interesting. And now we've had, the various different perspectives, let's say, of kind of more regional and institutional. That was very interesting. And I'll just echo one point, which is hugely important. You just said in the wrapping up there was, you know, that having the policy in itself clearly is not enough. You need to do the training and then to support, and you know, people need to know what the policy is and really how it's implemented. So it's not just a case of producing it and then hoping it will run its course. So I think that's very interesting. And yeah, again, lots of interesting information there that we need to really continue to discuss and share and really pick up, you know, all the lessons learned in the way that EMBL has approached this open site. So that's again excellent. So that brings us to the end of our presentation. So thank you very much. Now, before moving on, those of you who've been looking at the chat will see there's a couple of interesting questions there. And if I may, just before we move on to the next part of this, I'm just going to request any of the previous presenters to respond to this question. So this is the question of open science engagement with societal actors. Now, the original questioner suggests that this pillar is seen as a separate policy, whereas other open access, open data, open source and open hardware policies that are linked together. And the inference is, or the suggestion is, that areas such as citizen science aren't receiving the same attention as the policies that were mentioned. So can I please invite any of the presenters or anyone, in fact, in the meeting who wishes to respond on that? We've seen a bit of response in the chat, but rather than read that out again, I can please invite anyone. Just raise your hand if you wish to respond to this. So the question is areas such as citizen science not receiving the same attention in the policies that open access, open source, open data, open hardware, and so on are receiving? So please, the floor's open. Please just indicate with the hand, and I'll request you to turn your microphone on. Don't see anyone. Ms. Manola, please yes, go ahead.
So I just can start. I think the idea, at least I can speak from the European perspective, is that it is finding its way in the policies. The implementation is hard because the citizen science and the groups are not, you know, there is an association of citizen science organizations, mainly museums and research organizations like this, and they find their ways in the universities and in the research performing institutions. It's rather hard at the moment because the priorities are not always the same. On the libraries, especially on the national libraries, they have started open science and engaging citizens in their implementation. So it's a mixture. It's not as top as the open publications and as the open and fair data, but at least in Europe it's there.
Thank you. Thanks very much. Anybody else wish to comment or respond on this, please?
Laura also has her hand up.
I'm not seeing the hand, so please let me know who else wishes to. So,
yes,
Laura, please go ahead. Yes,
Laura, please. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Regarding citizen science, there are many initiatives currently in Latin America and the Caribbean, but it requires, as the question mentions, more attention from the methodologies, the survey methodologies that we are enforcing to visualize those initiatives. One good alternative is the one of the IBIC in Brazil that has launched the CIVIP platform to support science, citizen science, and to report the initiatives and the evolution on citizen science infrastructure in the region. But of course, there is a long tradition in serving open science initiatives regarding open access and regarding open data, but we are on the way of serving these initiatives that are expanding in our region. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. And perhaps we have time for one more respondent on this specific issue, please. Okay. Yes, please. Omo Oyaya, please. You have the floor.
Hi. I was just going to say that, you know, from the African perspective, there are a few projects, you know, but yes, the limitations that have been described by the others exist. And there's also the requirement to collect data and the issues of connectivity that sort of besieging the continent. So that's also a limitation. So the focus is on the priority areas that have been enumerated previously and sort of supporting higher education to be an active player.
Just the mic, please, Ezra.
Sorry. Thank you so much. And I don't think I see any more requests for the floor. I'm not seeing hands.
There was one more, sorry, from the person who originally posted the question.
Okay, please go ahead. Sorry, I can't see your hand, so I can't indicate who it is. But please, if you, the original poster of the question, if you wish to comment, please do now.
Yeah.
Hi, go ahead.
Thank you very much for the responses. They are very helpful. Yeah, just to point out that there is some efforts. Also, there is an effort of a mutual learning process that is currently happening at the European level between different member states, but it's an area that requires specific policy, and it's worth kind of noticing how this pillar is treated differently from the other ones.
Okay. Okay. Thank you. Thanks very much for that. Okay, so now we'll draw a line under that session, please. We'll come back to some discussions later. But now I'd please like to hand over to give the floor to my colleague Anna Persic, who many of you will know, many of you have worked with for a number of years on this. And she'll take us through really some more specifics on the objectives, and then we'll have more of a Q&A on the feedback and questions related to that. So Anna, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Ezra, and many thanks to everybody who have joined the working group. Again, already from the presentations and from what we have in the chat, we are already starting to get a feeling of where the group might be going and how it can be helpful. And it's great to have almost 80 participants who actually joined today. It does show that there is something really important that we are doing here, and that is useful for both the research community and society more broadly. So I'll share my screen now and continue with the presentation. And the idea would be really to see with you all what the objectives of the working group could be. We have some ideas, but we would be happy to get some feedback from your side and see how we can really make this working group useful. Because as Ezra said, we do know that policy is one of the high impact areas. So if we get that right in the field of open science, many other things can also fall into place. But it is also true that it's quite complex. So we have to understand exactly where the value added would be from the side of UNESCO, and also what would be needed so that the recommendation as we have it right now can be implemented most efficiently. So just a little overview of who is in the working group. We have decided to have these working groups open-ended, technical, multidisciplinary, and multi-stakeholder. So we had 112 registered this morning, out of whom 80 have actually connected today, which is very good. And from over 45 countries, we have all the region represented. And for us, that is extremely important, because these different perspectives from different regions are very, very important when we have to contextualize open science and open science policies. And we really have a variety of different actors who are part of the working group, which is also quite important to make sure that we get all the perspectives and all the views inside the work of the working group. So we have university and research institutes, from students to directors, national academies of science, ministries of science and higher education, associations of universities, librarians, citizen science representatives, experts, indigenous knowledge holders, research funders, publishers, publisher associations, some permanent delegations of UNESCO, national commissions for UNESCO, Category 2 center and chairs, and then some other regional and international institutions. So really, really good to have a broad overview of the group, and we will be sharing the membership with you and the list of participants at the end of the meeting. Now, with regards to kind of the objectives of this working group, the recommendation that was adopted in November last year is actually quite specific in terms of open science policies or requirements or recommendations for open science policies. There is a whole an area of action on developing and enabling policy environment for open science, with a series of different recommendations for member states, ranging from developing effective institutional and national open science policies and legal frameworks, aligning open science policies, strategies, and actions from individual institutions to local and international levels, then mainstreaming gender equality into open science policies, enhancing the inclusion of citizen and participatory science as integral part of open science policies and practices at the national, institutional, and funder levels. So this already responds a little bit to some of the questions which were raised during the presentations and after the presentations, meaning that we do have some of these elements already in the recommendations. So we have kind of a guidance as to what would need to be done by the different member states and different actors. In terms, further recommendations that we have in this area of action is really for member states to encourage research performing institutions, particularly those that are publicly funded, to implement policies and strategies for open science. So there is a push for policies and strategies development at the institutional level. And then again, encouragement of research performing institutions, universities, scientific unions to adopt statements of principles in line with this recommendation to encourage open science practice in coordination with national science academies, associations of early career researchers, such as Young Academies or the International Science Council. So again, a lot of good elements are already in the recommendation. We just probably need to unpack them a little bit and provide some guidance as to how to implement it very concretely. Another part which we find very important in the recommendation is that it also says how this should be done. And it says through a transparent, participatory, and multi-stakeholder process that includes dialogue with the scientific community, particularly early career researchers and other open science actors. So the idea for development of these policies is really that they also serve as a platform to bring together the different stakeholders at the national level in the development of these policies. And it's very encouraging to hear from Laura Rovelli that in Latin America, to implement the UNESCO recommendation on open science, some countries are putting together these national committees made from different stakeholders to guide them in the implementation. What we have learned from the development of the recommendation is really this need to keep the process related to any kind of guidance or policy on open science consultative and multi-stakeholder to make it really work. So on our side in UNESCO, we have conducted a very preliminary mapping of the different open science policies, open access, open data, some similar strategies that exist, different instruments that exist, and this is all to be verified and really not to be cited at this point. It's very preliminary, but we thought it would be interesting to show you some of these results, preliminary results during this working group. And we do see really an evolution of the different existing data policies or open access policies or even open science policies. And we do see that basically kind of the evolution in time was from open access policies, which were the first ones kind of to be developed and hopefully implemented, open data following, and now more and more we have countries that are either merging these different components, as we were saying before, or developing open science roadmaps that really are integrating the different elements of open science as put forward in the recommendation. And I think from UNESCO's perspective, these integrated policies are going to be very critical for the implementation of the recommendation. And also one thing to remind you is that the member states will have to report back to UNESCO on the progress made every 4 years. So it will be important also to report on the state of the different policies and policy instruments and the future of those policies in different countries and in different regions. Now, we have also kind of, again, these are very, very preliminary results. They need to be verified, particularly with member states. And we will be sending a letter to all of our member states to give us official information about their open access, open data, or open science policy and other policy instruments. But for the moment, we see that there is some 21 countries in Western Europe and North America with some kind of national policy on open access data or on open science. Eastern Europe follows 15, then Latin America, Caribbean, as Laura was saying, also pretty high up in terms of the number of countries having some kind of policy related to open science. Then Asia and Pacific, Africa, and the Arab states, where there are less of these national policies. It is also true that we, as I said, this is a preliminary desktop study. It is a question also of languages. Maybe we did not manage to cover everything that was out there because it was in a different language. So it has to be verified. But I think the trend overall is the one that we see on this graph. And so we were looking also at those national policies really on open science, so integrating, going beyond open access and open data. And again, we see that in terms of Europe, Western and Eastern Europe, there is some work that has been done there in terms of more integrated open science policies, followed by Latin America and then the other regions. So it will be interesting to really map properly these policies and see where we are, and as you were saying, start learning from each other and seeing what the different elements are and how different countries are approaching them. We do agree it's not just about national policies or regional policies, and here one of the questions for the working group is how important regional policies are. We can see that there are some regional policies in Europe or in Latin America that do make a push for the other countries. Is this something that would be of interest for other regions as well? But besides the regional and national policies, Natalia has already mentioned that we also see this increase in institutional policies or open access mandates or other mandates for open science. Again, we are talking mainly about open access for the moment, is what is easiest to measure and what we have most of. The question will be what other mandates we have to be looking at and what other types will have to be put in place for institutions as well. We are also looking at where we can find observatories or repositories of different open science policies and policy instruments. Natalia has mentioned the EOSC Observatory, the Open Science Observatory of the EU. The OECD, of course, has its STIP Compass, Science, Technology, Innovation and Policies Compass, which also has entry points for open science. The global open access portals looking into open access policies at the more global level, put together by UNESCO, Redalyc, Indian Statistical Institute, and America. And I think Laura had mentioned it before. And on our side, we have the UNESCO's Global Observatory on Science Policy and Innovation, on Science Policy Instruments, sorry, that we are currently restructuring, remodeling, so that it can also be used for the monitoring of UNESCO-related recommendations, including the UNESCO recommendations. So it really is a global observatory of science, technology, innovation, policies, and instruments. And we are trying to understand what would be the best way of capturing and structuring the parts on open science policies. On institutional level, we have the roadmap, but maybe there are also some other observatories and repositories for institutional policies. This is all very important because very often when countries or institutions are trying to build their own policy, they do go around to look for different other examples. So it is important to give visibility to these observatories who actually already do contain this information about the existing policies and policy instruments. So all this background to guide us a little bit to the objectives of this working group, and it is really to provide some guidance to us at UNESCO as to the needs and how we should structure a global repository of open science policies and policy instruments, knowing that we already have our platform, the UNESCO GoSpin platform, but we do need further guidance as what type of policy instruments to include in there, how to structure it, what kind of questions to ask in the survey that then we disseminate to all the member states, and they're the ones actually uploading the information. Another key objective is to identify key steps in the formulation of open science policies, and also key challenges, particularly with its implementation. So I think one of the things that we will have to produce to accompany the implementation of the recommendation in this part, particularly on enabling policy environment, is to develop some kind of an open science policy guide. I have taken very good note of the model policies that OpenAIRE has been doing. Is this something that we can use and kind of adapt to be adaptable also to the other countries as well? So these are the three key objectives that we had in mind for this working group. But of course, we are happy to discuss this with you and see if there are some other issues that the group should actually be looking into. So this is the timeline. This is not the end dates. These are the starting dates for these different parts. So from June, the idea of starting to think about this global repository of open science policies. In September, we would like to share with you maybe some ideas on key steps and challenges for open science policies, and a first draft of an open science policy guide sometimes in December. And we do hope that the group will follow us along the way. So some of the questions for this meeting would be, what are the main policy needs for open science, challenges for creating and implementing a policy? And we already heard some of them in the previous discussions. Successful policy initiatives, existing policy instruments, key strengths and weaknesses of different instruments, and then what information should a global repository on open science include. So I think I'm going to stop here and open it up for discussion. I was not able to check the chat, but I do want to invite everybody to just raise your hands. You can respond to some of these questions, or you can provide your comments or your ideas, and we'll be happy to take note and respond. So the floor is yours. We do have some time for discussion, so happy to hear from you all. And checking to see for the different hands. Natalia?
Okay, yeah, I'm trying to find all the. I really like the idea of a global observatory for open science, and UNESCO is on top of this. But how, one of the difficult things that we have encountered is not the development of the observatory, nor even the indicators, the consensus where we find it, but it's the maintenance and upgrade of it. So some country will put some information in there, but what happens with the updatedness of the country? And I'm saying those because in Europe, we have the networks. We make sure that the engagement process is a lot. So how would UNESCO see that as a global initiative? Who would be what would be the roles and the organizations who would be responsible for this for the country pages or the country or the institutional policies?
Thanks, Natalia. I can try to respond very quickly, knowing that I don't yet have all the answers. And Ezra and colleagues from UNESCO, Ferry, Tiffany, if you know more, please jump in. The way we saw it, and we were thinking about this maintenance and upgrade because we had the same problem. There are some of these similar issues with the GoSpin platform. Here, what is interesting is that the member states are obliged in a way, because they have adopted the recommendation, they do have to report back to UNESCO every 4 years. So in a way, through the reporting principles and the reporting requirement of the recommendation, they would need to update their inputs into the platform. And we would like to, but then we will see how it works. Of course, we would be there to help from the Secretariat, etc. But we really do want member states to take ownership of this and also be responsible for the data that is particularly on their own national policies. For the institutional level, I don't think we would have the capacity to have all the institutional policies, etc. But at least national policies, national strategies or regional ones, hopefully through the reporting mechanisms of the recommendation, that would be the incentive for member states to keep it updated. And our idea is also to have this open science outlook that would come out every 2 years or 1 year. We have to see how that would work, how much time we would have. And countries usually like to update their information before those outlooks are published, so as not to find themselves too low on the different gradings and in these types of assessments of where the different countries are. But again, I think we will have to work on these issues all together, learn also from your experience, see what works, what doesn't, and try to do it as good as possible, as to the best, and evolve as we move on. Yeah. I see another hand, Ishwaran.
Yeah.
Oh, you just muted now, Ish. Sorry, Dr. Ishwaran, you're just muted. If you can just unmute yourself so we can hear you.
Sorry. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. You had a slide on open data, open access, and open science. It'd be interesting to know what kind of countries go for data and what kind of countries go for science and the others who go for access.
I think it wasn't, again, we had a broad overview and it was kind of first open access, then open data, then open policy. And then countries who didn't have open access or open data may just start with open science policy and then include the others. So it was more of an evolution kind of, at least from what we've seen, and maybe we are wrong, rather than, just say, okay, there are specific countries that go for specific things. But this is maybe something to have a better look at and see if there are some other reasons particular for those differences in different policies.
Okay, thanks.
No problem. Any other hand? Again, I can see some discussions in the chat. Claudia Medeiros, we've seen some of your inputs here.
Yeah, I don't know how to raise my hand. Okay,
oh, okay.
So I waved to you, and I'm here in two hats. I'm a member of the Brazilian Academy of Sciences, and I head its Open Science Initiatives, but I'm also I'm also responsible for open science policies and the funding. Oh, start my video. Okay. Hello to all of you from Brazil. I'm also responsible for creating and implementing open science policies and a big funder in Brazil. It's not a national funder, it's a state funder. And my comment is that there are two big challenges. One concerns policy versus stable funding. Because in Latin America, I see lots of policies being established without funding being available to implement them. Okay, so this, at least in our region, it's a big challenge. And the other challenge is culture change, because open science requires that, and that comes with training, education, rewards, incentives, recognition, and all that kind of thing. That's all I wanted to say at this moment. And afterwards, someone can teach me how to raise my hand. Thank you.
Thank you very much. No, I mean, we are all in agreement, and we have to see how to raise these issues. For the moment, at least from our perspective, the way we are kind of approaching it is that we wanted to see what needs to be done on the policy side, and then on the same sides, on kind of separately, and then reconnect funding and incentives. And actually, we have another working group on funding and incentives, and there will be, of course, overlaps, and we will have to see how the discussions in one area affect the discussions in the other, and vice versa. So, and definitely, as we were saying before, just the policy without an implementation strategy, without incentives, without some kind of funding mechanism is very difficult to work. Yes, Victoria, you had your hand up, please.
Hi, I just wanted to mention that at EMBL, we're working on writing up a summary about how we came up with the open science policy. So this had taken place over the last 2 years, and we had some documentation, but we would like to put together the step-by-step. And also these questionnaires can also be shared. So I think in general, for many organizations that have open science policies, ideally they also track how these policies were developed, or just to have a record and have an understanding of how these came about, and so that we have not only the summary, but also the history and the construction of the summary. That would be very useful.
That's great. Thank you. Thank you very much. No, definitely. And again, this is something also to be shared with other institutions, similar or others, who would like to learn from the development processes of others, including implementation of policies. I have seen also some responses here from Chloe Donnell. If you would like to say a few things about the funding support and policy uptake, I think it would be great to hear from you as well. Chloe?
Hi,
yes.
Sorry.
I just put you on the spot, but I like the comment, and I think it's good to hear it. Yes.
Yeah, so just for context, I talked to researchers, particularly publishing researchers at Springer Nature. Our team did the State of Open Data survey. Well, we do that every year, and I recently did a tracking, launch a tracking open science survey actually this year as well, and look at authors who are publishing or trying to, or don't want to publish open access even when they have funding as well, looking at, you know, things like that in the landscape. And I've noticed actually that when we see that authors are mandated or encouraged by their institution, when we map that back, sometimes they don't publish open access, or they don't deposit their data, for example, either because they weren't aware of this mandate. So again, you can have that policy in place, but there's going to be limited uptake if we don't have that awareness. So I think apologies, I can't remember your name. It was towards the end. We had that talk about having the training in place and having those onboarded researchers always making sure they're aware of it and being supported in that. That's a huge the key thing there. And then the other thing was, even if they were aware of it, they weren't really being enforced. So there wasn't really a need for them to do it. And I think that's quite twinned with this issue of, well, if I don't have to do it, why should I? And that's kind of that incentive structure as well. I'm, I'm busy doing all of these other things. There's that publish or perish thing. If I don't have to publish away or deposit my data, that's time out of my day that I don't, need to do these things. So we've seen, those institutions where policy is in place, there's not 100% uptake or enforcement because there's not a need to all the time, or there isn't awareness, or there isn't support. There's limited funding. So there's those three aspects I think have to always be considered, and institutions, funders, or at the governmental level, all those actors need to make sure that those three things are always considered as well, so that researchers are supported and incentivized to actually make sure that they are acting on these policies instead of just having them in place.
Great, thank you very much. No, absolutely. The outreach, the awareness, the incentives, again, particularly when we talk to researchers, is something absolutely key. I have another hand here, Antika Kulina.
Hi, I would just like to add up on Chloe's suggestion or comments. So I'm an active researcher, but I also promote open science in my research community. So it's ecology and evolutionary research. And what I see is that researchers also lack in-place support. So we don't have people who would help us in implementing open data or open software or whatever. So I can have some basic level of understanding it, but as soon as I get more complex data sets, it's very difficult for a researcher in an institute to do this in their research time, which is obviously limited. And also, as previously mentioned, incentives are something on a different side of the spectrum. So I think in place trained people, data stewards or similar, would really bring a huge difference. But currently there is no, in most institutions I work at, there is not enough money for these kind of support personnel. Which would also enable, obviously, training of researchers that want to learn more than basics.
Yeah, great. That's a very good point, and actually something that is addressed in the recommendation. So we can pull that out from the recommendation as a way to put a little bit more highlight and spotlight on the need to actually have support people in place in different institutions to actually help with the implementation. I'm looking at the clock here, and Ezra, I'm not sure if we still have time for one question. I kind of like also this part here from Eloy on the need to establish and agree on a taxonomy of policies and their components and parts. I think that's very interesting. Eloy, if you want to just 1 minute expand a little bit, and we'll see how we can really integrate that in the work of the working group.
Okay. Thanks for just expanding on what I said. I think it's very important to build that tool that we can be on the taxonomy of the policies, or what are the types of policies, what are the components of those policies, and we have a rich taxonomy that will allow benchmarking and then also agree on the indicators. And my point is that there is already several debates, probably not connected, and maybe this initiative from UNESCO is the opportunity to bring all those that are debating this and try to build. It will not be easy, but try to build some consensus because that will be useful not only for UNESCO, but also in other parts of the world. Thanks.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. And we are very much open, share with us all of these different initiatives. We'll have a look at that, see how we can wave them in through the working groups, through the implementation. The recommendation is broad enough, really, so that it allows us to bring together the different components. So just let us know, make us aware of these issues. We are also discussing several things in several fora for the moment, with the idea of bringing it all together under the umbrella of the recommendation. So I think, I'm sorry, Ezra, we went a little bit over time, but it was interesting to hear from the different participants, and I'll hand it over to you right now again.
Thanks very much. Thank you. Thanks, Anna. And yeah, indeed, I think that we could discuss this for a very long time, but please, of course, this is just the first of our meetings. So there'll be many opportunities to discuss this further. There's been a lot of information shared, many very interesting and exciting ideas and avenues to explore. So we'll certainly come back to that. And the way that will be done will be presented a little bit later when we just look at the next steps. But so now, yeah, we have a special session. A quick intervention, please, from the CEO of the Journal of Science Policy and Governance. And this is on a call for papers, but I shall leave it to Adriana Bankson to tell us exactly what that is. Ms. Bankson, please, you have the floor.
Thank you. Let me share. Okay. So good morning, good afternoon, good evening. My name is Adriana Bankston. I'm the CEO and managing publisher for the Journal of Science Policy and Governance. And thank you to UNESCO for the invitation to speak to you today about our call for papers on open science policies as an accelerator for achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. So I want to give you just a brief background about the journal. So we are an internationally recognized open access and peer-reviewed research publication. We were established 10 years ago by senior leaders and young scholars in science and technology policy, and we really are more than a journal in that we provide training opportunities for early career researchers interested in policy as well. So our mission is to catalyze the engagement of students and early career researchers in science policy and governance debate through policy research and writing. We publish policy papers from students, postdocs, policy fellows, and early career researchers. And through the journal, we also bolster their research and writing credentials in science policy and encourage them to engage in policy discourse and debate and contribute to policymaking at all levels of government. We publish policy work in a variety of formats, which you can see here, including op-eds, technology assessments, policy memos and analyses, white papers, book reviews, workshop proceedings, and other research articles that cover every corner of science and technology policy. You can see here the topics we publish on, which is broad, covers a wide variety of policy areas, including government, university, industry interfaces, scientific research policy, and the management of science and technology, to name a few areas that may be of interest to this group where open science can fit in. In addition, we promote the publications through our global mailing lists, events such as workshops, webinars, and a podcast where we interview published authors. And you can follow us on LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. And we also have a newsletter where you can keep up to date with our issues and events. JSPG publishes 2 standard issues and 2 to 4 special topics issues a year. Standard issues are an open call for submissions and articles on all topics that we publish on. And special topics issues, which we'll talk about today, are sponsored by a partnering organization. Both of issues actually can be sponsored and are more focused in scope or topic. And eligibility to publish in JSPG includes being a current student, postdoc, policy fellow, generally within 5 years of earning your last degree, or an early career professional. And many individuals who submit to the journal come from universities and research institutes, nonprofits, and other organizations focused on policy development and implementation. So it aligns well with the goals of this group. So now to talk about the call for papers. Following the adoption of the recommendations, JSPG, UNESCO, and the UN Major Group for Children and Youth launched a call for papers and competition on open science policies as an accelerator of the Sustainable Development Goals. This is one of the initiatives that are around the recommendations. And the submission deadline is July 10th. The target publication date is November 21st of this year. So perhaps you'd be able to include that in your summaries and reporting that you plan to do at the end of the year. The special issue is supported also in kind by outreach partners from the Global Young Academy Working Group on Open Science. And you can see the link to the call for papers. It is bit.ly/JSPG Open Science. Within the context of the UNESCO recommendations, we bring in really the policy piece as well as contributions of early career researchers, which you have emphasized in this session already. The call for papers itself is centered around the UNESCO recommendation and is broadly framed around a more accessible, transparent, and participatory way of designing, conducting, publishing, and evaluating scholarly research. And we also want to bridge the science, technology, and innovation gaps between and within countries, fulfilling the human right to science and leaving no one behind. And the call for submissions page, if you look on there, contains several guiding questions for prospective authors to consider when preparing their submissions. And these relate to the areas listed here: capacity building, infrastructure, public participation, collaborative governance, citizen science and decision-making, cultural development and evaluation, linking science to policy, science for all, and standard setting for knowledge creation. So within the special issue, we hope to address questions focused on policy opportunities and challenges around open science and discuss ways to implement the policy recommendations proposed by published authors. And in terms of process, submissions will be reviewed by the JSPG editorial board, undergo several rounds of peer review, after which we'll have the accepted articles enter into a policy competition. Winners will then be able to present in partner organized events around open science. And we also plan to give the opportunity to all published authors from the special issue to discuss their publications through different speaking opportunities in our podcast as well. So if there are any ideas from this group in terms of how we can highlight the publications and the authors, would be glad to hear that. And leading up to the submission deadline, we have organized a series of virtual training sessions to provide prospective authors with opportunities to practice writing on open science topics and also learn from experts in the field. So in April, we organized the Science Policy Writing Workshop, where we provided participants with opportunities to develop a paper outline and practice policy writing on open science. This workshop is followed by 4 webinars on specific areas in the recommendations. And the first was focused on setting the stage for open science policy development, infrastructure, and capacity building. The second was on developing collaborative governance for open science through public participation and inclusive knowledge. And upcoming webinars in June will focus on aligning incentives, rewards, and evaluation methods for open science in the scientific process. And finally, fostering international cooperation and reducing gaps to scientific knowledge through open science. And you can learn more through about these events and the link on the slide, bit.ly/JSPG Open Science Events. So we encourage you to register for these events if you're interested, encourage your trainees to participate, and also we'll have all the recordings posted on our YouTube channel. And with that, thank you again for giving me a few minutes to speak to you today. I'm happy to answer questions about the call for papers or the journal more broadly. On this slide, you can see links to all of our channels and the call for papers. Again, I can share these links with the group as well. And we hope that you'll help us advertise the call for papers, and we'll look forward to everyone's submissions to the special issue. Thank you.
Much. Thank you, Adriana. We have one very specific question, if I may just read out that's from the chat. And it is, if a student submits, can the supervisor be the co-author, or is it just student author perspective?
Yes, that's fine. So primarily this is geared towards trainees. We have had groups of researchers submit where the majority were students, and we had the PI as a co-author. So that's an option. And I'll share the link to the submission page so you can read more about the eligibility. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thanks very much. And thank you very much for that presentation. And yeah, we endorse that and encourage everybody to please submit and share with your network. So thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you, Adriana. Okay, we're reaching the end now. It's already 3 o'clock. We're just going to hand over to Anna to give us a quick few words on next steps. But apologies to those who have to move on, and I'm afraid I do. So if that's okay, Anna, I'll hand over to you and say at this stage, thank you very much to everyone. We would huge amount of information, very, very interesting, and we'll continue sharing and discussing in this working group as we go forward. So I shall hand over to Anna, and please, I apologize, I need to go to a meeting which has already started. So please, Anna, if you can take us through the next steps. Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you, Ezra. Thanks so much. And I'll be quite brief. And we believe that the next steps are pretty straightforward. So our idea for this working group is we would invite you all to share the answers to some of these questions with us, sending it just plainly to openscience@unesco.org by the 10th of July. What are the main policy needs for open science? What are the main challenges for creating, implementing open science policies? What are the existing successful open science policy initiatives, existing policy instruments, strengths and weaknesses, and what information should the global repository on open science policy include? So you are free to send this to us in a Word document, any other document. If you agree with that, we can then later on post them online. But we would need all of these inputs from your side to be able to work through it, analyze it, and then start preparing both an outline for the Global Open Science Policies Repository, as well as some guidance towards open science policy guide that we would like to prepare for the member states. Again, please feel free to send us emails, ask more questions, exchange. If there is need for any additional channel of communication, let us know. This is just the rest of the working groups. But what I wanted to say here is that the idea would be that we collate all the information that we receive from you, from the chat also, and from the discussions today. We will pull everything together, present something for you for our next meeting, which would be around the 5th of September, the beginning of September, where we would start looking into more specifically the guides and guidelines from this group to UNESCO towards for us to move forward towards those deliverables that we have set for these working groups. So if this is okay for all of you, we will maybe leave you with that. If there is anybody who has an additional question, we will of course share the questions and the contact with all of you after the meeting. We will post online the recordings, all the presentations, if the presenters agree, and we will keep in touch by email with the idea of having the meeting on the 5th of September, probably the same time between 1 and 3 p.m., which kind of accommodates many different time zones. And we are really thanking you in advance for all the contributions that you may have.